Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast with Ron and Kristin, where leadership meets entertainment. This podcast features stories with names and certain aspects that have been changed to keep submissions private. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast, where leadership meets entertainment. I'm joined by my co-host, Ron. Ron, we are coming off of our 100th episode. What kind of response have you gotten?
Kristin, I got to tell you, we got a lot of response on that one. And our guests, Cassie and Marty, were phenomenal. They seem like they've been podcasting their whole life. But I got to tell you, the blooper reel, we got the most traction. I've had family and friends, people laugh out loud. And I kind of had a funny moment. You said you didn't notice it, but I had a sty, everyone, if you're listening
so
at
hot.
one point. So I wore my glasses.
Is that why you were wearing? Okay. Yeah.
Well, I'm wearing glasses right now also.
Not the sunglasses, but like glasses.
No, this was regular glasses, but I thought it wouldn't show. And anyway, a buddy of mine's watching. He goes, dude, your eye, what happened to you? Looked like I'd been beaten. But I don't know why I thought this was so funny. Kristin and I, there's a couple times, we will admit, we've been a little rushed because we're coordinating all this stuff.
Yeah.
So we did one, some people, were talking to me about not getting jobs and all that. So we decided to put together like 20 jobs you can get right now. So Kristin's reading and she's like, 20 high paying jobs you can get. And then she went, I probably shouldn't say high paying.
Yeah.
I don't know why I thought that was so funny. Hey, it shows our honesty there, folks.
Oh my gosh. I know, right? I was like, yeah, this is a little misleading. How about just 20 jobs?
We should have done what other marketers like $2 million the first year.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. That's hilarious.
What did you like about it?
You know what my favorite was, and I still remember this one, it was when I started with the intro and then you just busted out laughing and I was so taken aback. I was like, Ron, I didn't know why you were laughing.
No, you're forgetting. There was a very specific reason you and I had been cracking up. Now, I don't remember exactly why, but we had been cracking up. So we finally got composed. And you were saying, all right, we got it. We got it.
Oh, yeah. Pull it together.
And I was trying to hold it and I lost it. By the way, my daughter Jansen goes, I'm not seeing you laugh like that. I said, I know. I know.
We have a good time.
It was fun.
Yeah. Sure. I like it because that's like what happens behind the scenes. So before we've just been talking for 25 minutes before we recorded and we've already been laughing and then it happens after. So yeah, it's cool. It's a little peek behind the curtains.
So yeah, it was. So Kristin, as you know, even Marty and Cassie mentioned hearing about the podcast because they looked up Horrible Bosses and found us. And throughout this time, we have talked about doing more on bosses. We picked on bosses a lot early on.
Yeah.
And I had people even say, I love that episode. It seems to be the narcissist or horrible bosses.
Yeah.
So we began to delve in our materials, and we've got an original here, folks. So this episode came from notes, and I'd put together a bunch of notes before I was going to write my book. Of course, Kristin has her stories and input on this, but I think you're going to enjoy it. And we're calling this 10 types of horrible bosses. So this is like Horrible Bosses 2.0, as Cassie said, 10 types of horrible bosses. And I guarantee if you've been out in the workforce, you've probably worked for one or two of these people.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, what's your thoughts on this episode, Kristin?
Yeah, no, I think it's great because, it was so nice hearing from Cassie and Marty because it really just reiterated what sticks with people, what's resonating. And I can't imagine anyone that's been in the workforce for more than a year has likely experienced a horrible boss. It might be an assistant manager, might be someone, a shift lead, I don't know how you can avoid it. So I like that we are talking about something that impacts everybody. So I'm glad we're going for a 2.0 here. It's been 2 years, so I'd say enough time has passed.
Agreed. I want to do a preface here. If you listen to Ron's rants on any of my social media platforms, I always recommend talking to the person. But we're not naive on this podcast. We know that might not serve you well, or you just can't do that. Secondly, we recommend you go to HR. That too may not be viable for you. But that is the preface on all of these. We just didn't want to repeat that over and over. So if you look for someone to be healthy, for there to be a good work environment, it should be creative and warm, sometimes fun. And through some studies, I found out there's a part of the brain called the ventral striatum, or the seeking system, and that is designed for us to be curious. That's what keeps people inventing. And if you think about, if you go back to cavemen or whatever we had, all of these things started. Someone invented a wheel, and then it just continued on. So we are actually supposed to be that way. And what happens in many of these work environments, when you're in a toxic culture and you're just trying to keep your head down, focus on your work, the creative part of your brain is like locked up in prison. Then that's the steps toward getting burned out, which we will do on another episode, talk about burnout. But that's the problem in a lot of work environments, is especially managers, they don't understand that their staff wants buy-in. They want to be creative. They want maybe a new challenge. And I think that's one of the problems before we even go into these personality types.
Yeah, no, it's funny when you were saying that, I started thinking about, I know of somebody who was let go for not being curious enough. And it's wild. Imagine getting canned, and they had worked for the company for like 20 plus years, big company. And imagine getting canned and then having to explain to your spouse that you weren't curious enough. But that seeking system, I guess, wasn't obvious.
Kristin and I try not to repeat stories. It ties in so well. It's just that I had a farms instructor that started doing video editing, and one of the managers was upset about it. And I don't know why. I just felt like if this person enjoys it and they're doing their job, what's it matter? So I agreed to let them continue, and morale was great. But I know the middle manager was frustrated about that because they felt like they didn't sign up for that. But I knew that creativity and exploration would help, morale and help this individual. And I believe it did, based on exactly what we were talking about.
Yeah, it is important to allow within reason, right? We have a job to get done, but you want your employees to be able to tap into that creative side.
All right, Kristin, I'm going to get us started. Let's start off with the tyrant. Again, we're giving you 10 types of bosses. Now, there could be more, but these are 10 that's pretty prevalent. The tyrant. This is a person who has deep-seated problems, and they bring them to work. They may not admit it, but this stuff doesn't just happen at work. There's other things wrong. They're undisciplined or either untrained to handle their emotions. They can't control their emotional responses. And these people, of course, don't trust their employees. They're micromanagers. They're the type of leaders who think you have to rule with an iron fist. And what happens is they infect the entire culture, but they can't see the forest for the trees, as they say. And it's very interesting. They're also saboteurs. They will sabotage someone because they really just don't care. They don't care if they make you look bad. And to make matters worse, employees usually do a couple of different things. Now, this is in general. They will either mimic the tyrant, and then they get irritable and start attacking one another, or they put their head in the sand and just hope that something will improve one of these days. They're trying not to get fired, basically. And in my book, Kristin, I told of working for someone like this, and it was so miserable. And fortunately, I was with the state. I got on with the feds and was able to leave, but there were so many people that left those positions because of someone who was a tyrant and had those narcissistic qualities.
Oh, yeah. I've worked for 2 tyrants because as you're talking, I'm reflecting, and both female. And what was really interesting is both of them had a relationship. They were both on their second marriage, and the men that they are with now, or at least when I was working for them, were a very type B personality, where the tyrants were the ones ruling with an iron fist in their relationships too. So it's really interesting if you reflect and then take a peek at their personal lives. Generally, you're not going to see a lot of health in that area.
Yeah.
I want to talk about, so executives generally allow this behavior to continue. And this is where we ask ourselves why a lot, right? I ask myself, like, why is this person still around?
Right.
Why are these people still here? They're able to get away with that. They have a bad reputation, but yet they remain. So executives allow this behavior to continue because the tyrant usually produces good numbers or products, at least for a while. And this continues until people start to quit the company. And at first, there are no real alarm bells until turnover becomes the norm. And then at that point, some companies begin to investigate. Some, not all.
Right.
But instead of terminating the tyrant, they move them to a different position. And this is what has happened in, the story that Ron has mentioned that's in his book. So, that's the why. 'Cause I know you guys are probably wondering how they remain.
Yeah, and there's other people going, isn't that the truth? There's people work for
Yeah.
years and they remain untouched, and even though they do horrible things. Now, after each one of these, or at least in these, we are going to give you some advice. Now, we've already talked about talking to someone. We've talked about reaching out to HR. Also, you need to take care of your own well-being, whatever that looks like for you. But if you're working for a tyrant, develop a backup plan and then take action. By just having a backup plan, that can provide you with some solace. But you might be the first one that has to take action. And you file a complaint or you go to HR. I know that's difficult and challenging, but a lot of times it takes one person who really has the gonads to step up and say, this is happening. Now, of course, you got to be ready for the fallout, have a support system, because a tyrant is usually narcissistic. So they're not going to go down without a fight. You can bank on that, but you got to mentally prepare yourself. And if you do have another job or you're taking another job, do the exit interview and be honest. It will help other employees in the future when you tell the truth. And I got to be honest with you, Kristin, I was so excited to get out of there, which they didn't do exit interviews, but I could have done something to volunteer, and I didn't. I just left. And then I started hearing about more and more people leaving a great career because of this one person. I regret that.
Yeah, I can totally see that. And it's funny, I just gave one of my friends advice who just resigned from their position to not give any negative feedback unless there is a formal exit interview. And because that's just how I work, right? Unless I'm so happy to get out of a toxic situation that I am not going to be trashing somebody else because it's not my problem anymore, right? But you do have to think about what you're leaving behind. So that is a good point you make there. All right, I'm going to go to our second one here, and that is the showman. The people have a superhero complex. Now, they do not care about their employees. They just want to look good in the process. And many of these individuals have narcissist qualities, and they expect accolades for everything they do. I'm sure we all know one or two.
The crowd goes wild.
Yeah, everyone's like, yes, yes. Now, weaker-minded employees play into the charade and they brown nose their way to the top, or at least they use that to survive. Don't play into it. Here's how to disarm a narcissist. You have to think, are they using fear, obligation, or guilt? Think FOG, fog. For example, they might say, I have to work all this overtime. They're using guilt. You could respond, I don't think you meant to, but you seemed like you were blaming me for the overtime, right? So they would be like, I have to work all this overtime, right? Like that's the way you would probably hear it. And then if someone works under them, they could feel like, oh, am I not pulling my weight? And that's why you're telling me that you have to work all this overtime, right? So don't play into it.
Yeah, I've seen people do that when someone has vacation scheduled that they've worked hard to get, and they're like, yeah, I'm going to have to do extra work. Yeah. So I am familiar with this, but when you're dealing with a narcissist, you want to give them a way out. And interrogators and a lot of people, even in marketing, call that the golden bridge, not the golden parachute, the golden bridge. Yeah. You have to make it easy for them to change their position, because I'm telling you, a narcissist, they will die if they don't have a golden bridge. They're going to jump off with no parachute. They're going to fight to the end. So if that happens, you just redirect the conversation like Kristin did, where she was saying, I'm sure you didn't mean to, and you're giving them that way out. So try to think about a way that you can restructure some of the narcissistic qualities by helping them. Like you're going to lunch, you might say, hey, you know what would be a good idea? Let's bring John and Sally. Maybe the narcissists don't like them, but you kind of give them a green light to bring them in. There's ways to handle a narcissist like that. We'll talk about some more.
Yeah, that and stick to your values. And we know it's difficult, but something good will come out of it. And when the showman is fishing for compliments, a viable strategy, which is one of my favorites, is gray rocking. And we talk about that in the narcissist episode that we did early on. It was very popular. In psychology, gray rocking is a technique where you avoid giving undeserved compliments. And in some instances, you simply ignore them or you keep the conversation work related. I know in we did a scenario where you were asking me, you were basically like egging me on to give you a compliment on your shirt, right? And naturally, because I am a nice person, I started falling into that. But instead, I had to end up gray rocking you. So that was a good little example we ran through in that episode. But and within reason, I've been gray rocking for years. So I still needed a little work. But eventually these types of supervisors, they'll stop trying to fish for your approval and they will respect you more in the long run.
Yeah, it was funny because the fact that you had a hard time not bragging on my shirt was proof that gray rocking is difficult. It takes work. It takes practice. It really does, but it works. All of these techniques, think fog, think gray rocking, redirect the conversation, give them that golden bridge, ignore them when you need to, and it will help you a lot.
Mm-hmm.
All right, number 3, and this one's tough, the buddy. These people want to be your friend. And it does feel good for a while to think, I can say anything I want around Frank because Frank and I are buddies. But the problem happens is when they use the friendship against you. They might say, hey, I'm your friend. Why would you do this? They try to connect the friendship with works. Others will, especially if they have a particular person that they're friends with, other people are going to see the favoritism, and that's bad for everyone.
Yeah.
And even if the friend of the boss gets promoted, everybody's going to say, oh, of course this person got promoted. They didn't deserve it. They're friends with the boss. So in that vein, think about it. Spending too much time one-on-one with your manager, it seems cool, but it's not cool to other people. So you want to avoid that perception of favoritism. And again, you want people to know you get things, work assignments, anything else, or promotions on your own merit, not because you're friends with the boss.
Right. I don't think I've ever had that problem. No one wanted to be my friend, Ron.
Well, that's understandable. But so here's what happened to me. Imagine this. Even though I was a section chief, I was teaching, defensive tactics, classroom, and I'm with all the guys. Like it's, when we first went there, we were like junior hires. So all of a sudden on Friday, I get promoted. I find out I'm promoted academy director. They put out the announcement Friday afternoon. I walk in Monday and I'm everyone's boss. And there was a part of me was like, I've lost all my friends. And I wanted to be friendly. I did know enough to know it couldn't be the same. But it is a difficult dichotomy, which is, I know we're plugging my book a lot. That's why I put the section, friend today, boss tomorrow, because I had such a hard time with that.
Yeah. And I have to just say, none of my bosses wanted to be like homies with me. My employees did though. And I ended up having to fire someone who had become pretty dear friend. So we're good. But
by the way, that's a great point. That makes termination a lot worse, a lot more difficult.
It does. I was always so professional and didn't allow anyone to cross lines from employee to friend except one person. And that one person I had to fire. But, it's the great thing is we have just a mutual respect for each other and everything is okay, but that is very rare. So I just highly recommend don't let those lines blur. I want to talk about the wet noodle. This manager is indecisive and allows staff to walk all over them. And I've seen this where, a boss is trying to be cool and current, and you can come across as the wet noodle instead. And in this instance, you might be proactive and manage up, or you must be proactive and manage up, but make sure you understand your responsibilities and always document your work. So again, this is when you're the wet noodle, you need to put yourself in check right now and say, is this me? Make sure you're using strong language when you communicate. And let's talk about if you have a manager like that, when you're communicating with the manager that's indecisive and allows staff to walk all over them, you need to maintain a CYA file, cover your ass file, right? And you also need to be strong with your communication. For example, send emails to the manager. I plan on doing this. Let me know by Thursday if you disagree, right? That assumptive language. And of course, you can try to talk with this person, but they probably won't improve. So you want to stay strong and decisive. And one day, maybe you will end up replacing the wet noodle, because a manager that is like that is not going to go far.
Yeah, they're spineless. They're just not. And the other thing I don't like about the wet noodle, they will never rattle the chains of their superiors. Now, I don't care. The building can be on fire. They don't want to bother the executive, and that's almost, I almost hate that worse than
I know.
the narcissist.
How do they get those roles? How does a wet noodle appear to be a leader enough to get into that role?
Well, that plays into the next one.
All right, perfect.
Let's take the next one.
All right.
Number 5 is the incompetent. This is a manager that would be the same as a wet noodle, maybe, who got promoted due to tenure, maybe DEI or the good old boy system. Regardless, he or she does not have the cognitive capacity or maybe the willpower to do the job. And in this instance, you must accept the fact that this manager is not going to have your back, and you do not have a safety net. That's a horrible feeling, but there's people probably listening and nodding their head.
Yeah.
Therefore, you will need alliances with other bright employees. This is one of those times when people have to pull together when you got an incompetent manager, because if the ship sinks, you might, you're on deck. You might go down with it.
Yeah.
So in some cases, you do have to do go the extra mile to keep things from totally sinking.
Right.
So you learn to depend on one another until something changes. Again, document your work, and that way, if something does go wrong, you at least have your version of what happened. You can show you were trying. And about being hired, we know, Kristin, that there's an episode, I think it's like number 2, Help I Hired a Dud. We know that people oversell themselves on the resume. Right. So some people come from the outside. I think you and I were both thinking initially like they get promoted from within, but they come from the outside.
That's true.
And there's companies glad to get rid of them, so they're not going to give them a poor recommendation. They come in and they're totally incompetent. So here we are.
Yeah, just like all the countries dumping their prisoners into the United States.
Yeah.
They don't want them back, by the way. Oh, that's crazy. Okay. So the next one here is the recluse. Now, this person would rather bury their proverbial head in the sand and avoid their managerial responsibilities. This is the ideal place for employees to manage up. You want to be assertive and ask for their input, force them to provide an opinion, coach them on the value of their input, and it's okay to give them some praise if they act proactively. This person might be someone who will come out of their shell with some prodding. If not, once again, cover your tracks with documentation.
That's really good. And Kristin, in our coaching program, we talk about trauma transfer. There's also, I knew a really good manager, but they got burned so many times that they became a recluse. Like there could be some psychological damage there. Maybe people broken their trust, or maybe they're dealing with stuff that you don't know about from above. So there could be a lot of reasons on the recluse. So you might be able to bring this person out a little bit by getting their opinion and coaching them. And when we say coaching them, you're basically applauding their efforts when they, bring their head out of the sand. But I have found that person, sometimes there's reasons that they're recluse.
Yeah. I would say work history has a huge piece of that.
Yeah, it does.
Or something in their personal life.
All right, number 7, this is delicate, but there are people that have personality disorders.
Yes, there are.
And maybe, maybe they were medicated during the interview, or maybe, there's been traumatic events, or maybe it's just getting worse over time. But these people also get promoted, and it's not a shock to the people around them, but the executives, a lot of times, they don't know much about people. So they promote this person, and you don't know how to operate, because maybe they're one person one day, they're another person another day, and it's really difficult. You try to read their mood, you try to respond accordingly, but it's just confusion. Hear me closely. In this situation, get your backup plan. Make a plan to leave if you possibly can. This situation is too volatile, and it could really come back on you. And if you can't leave, you may need to distance yourself. Just try to stay out of the, when the bombs are launched, you try to stay out of the way. Work as independently as possible, and also document your work as always. But that one is very tricky for sure.
It is. And I've had people work for me that had bipolar disorder. They opened up to me and told me that. And it was very difficult, because when they were up, they were wonderful and your favorite employee. And then one day you come in, or they come in, and you're like, hello, and you have someone completely different. It is very difficult to navigate. But yeah, that documentation, I can't say enough about that.
Kristin, I coached, as a matter of fact, a couple of people that have ADD, but one had a level of autism, and we literally did exercises. Now, some of this I had to do research, but I did see improvement. I'm not trying to insinuate that everything can be improved, but some things are just never focused on. People just say, oh, it's okay, this person's ADD, when there are exercises that you can work on to improve. But people, prepare to get out of there. That's our advice. You don't hear that on many podcasts.
If your manager is like that, yes. So this next one is the Nervous Nelly, and I've definitely worked for a manager like this. It's the hair on fire approach. Now, these people believe the world is ending, and they keep everyone on edge. And they usually use corporate or headquarters in the most negative way to carry on their worst fears. So, for example, the main office says that there's going to be budget cuts. This Nervous Nelly will exaggerate the situation into company layoffs. So don't allow the Nervous Nelly's vibes to influence you. Stay positive. Your coworkers are going to be drawn to your positivity. Also, stick to your routine. Breathe, get out of the office. Try to enjoy something about your day. Negativity and worrying can infect the entire organization. So proceed with optimism. And I know it's an oxymoron, but you can do it.
Yeah, optimistic caution. So the Nervous Nelly, one of the things we do in coaching is I have people literally watch James Bond, watch Denzel Washington. If you ever notice, people who are in charge, they always have smooth movements with their head. If you're listening, I'm doing slow movements, but kind of sharp. And it does give you the representation that you are in charge, or it represents to people that you're in charge. However, if you're doing this number, you look spastic, you look insecure. So you want to be cool, calm, and collected is what we're saying. And don't let poor Nelly. I hope there's no one named Nelly out there. I started to come up with a different name, but anyway, it's like Karen, right?
I know.
Nelly and Karen.
Yeah.
Okay, number 9. We've all seen this person, the do nothing. This manager delegates everything. They think they're good leaders, but in fact, they either have a personality disorder or they're just plain lazy. In this case, do the opposite. Be proactive. Document your work. Don't allow their laziness to infect you. And at some point, you may have to take a stand. You may have to stand up to them and justify. If they say, well, you didn't get this done, you got to be able to show that you did. And I had this situation. I've never told this story. So one time, Kristin, when I was a U.S. probation officer, I also taught defensive tactics. So you have different offices throughout the state. So I was in the central office, and when I taught defensive tactics, it was only like twice a year. Everyone came from the branch offices. Everyone would come together. We would do it at the West Virginia State Police Academy. So when I look, all the people that had to drive all these distances, they were all there.
Yeah.
But the people in the main office barely had any attendance, which was,
That's
the
lame.
bulk.
Yeah.
So when I got back, the chief asked me about attendance. He came back because someone else had told him. So anyway, I said, yeah, there wasn't much attendance from this office, central office. Well, he was a decisive chief. So he brought
Nice.
my supervisor in and lit him up.
I love it.
So all of a sudden, though, you get assigned pre-sentence investigations from the federal judge, and it's that full background case law, the whole thing. So what you would do is, if you were going to get the case, you would go to the plea hearing when they're pleading guilty. So I had like 3 in a row, but they were all on the same indictment, which is fine. It's easier to do it that way. But then I come back to my office the next day, I've got 3 more. And I mean, for you to juggle, to write 6 or 7 pre-sentence reports is very difficult, because I'm telling you, you're corresponding all over the country. You're doing all the background investigation, all that stuff. It was extremely. So one of the clerks, I didn't realize, I thought we just had a large influx of cases. And one of the clerks looked at me and said, "Who did you piss off?" And I said, "Why is that?" She showed me the list. There's people had 2, 3, I've got 9.
Oh, yeah.
So I went to the office. I was ticked. And he and I had a heated debate because he tried to deny. He goes, "I didn't even notice." I said, "Tim, this is directly related to the defensive tactics thing."
Yeah.
So anyway, we had it, I'd been around long enough by that point. I wasn't intimidated. So I knew the chief had my back as well. So he and I had a heated debate, and that never happened again. I'm not saying I recommend that, but this one called for it.
Yeah, good for you for actually, I think it's because we could just stew on things like that for a decade, right?
Yeah.
But I'm glad you addressed it.
Hey, I can stew, but when I'm having to work weekends, I don't stew long.
No way. Have to be that activator like you are. All right. So the final one is the exaggerator. And these individuals are dishonest. They will lie or exaggerate to get a desired result. And they're usually insecure and need constant attention. So they might exaggerate to get adulation, or it might be to impress you. Either way, don't be naive. Also, do not trust them. And let me throw out a couple of metaphors here. If their back's against the wall, they will throw you under the bus. Or let's see here. What's another one? You must keep things in perspective. This is important. You must keep things in perspective. Don't place yourself in a situation where your actions can be misrepresented. And also, don't put too much stock in their representations. Cover your tracks with documentation, and also stay true to yourself. And in this situation, you might want to dust off the resume and start planning your next move. Can you think of any other metaphors, Ron? I thought I'd be able to pull more than one out of my pocket here.
Well, we'll say if your head's in a noose, they will definitely pull the lever, whatever.
There you go, extreme. That's the exaggeration. I like it.
Yeah. No, these people can make you think things are good because they love it. If you're performing well, it makes them look good. So naturally, they're going to say, "Good job, Kristin." But really, they're just knowing that it made them look good to their superiors.
Right.
The exaggerator definitely has the superhero complex. And I got to be honest with you, there's a couple of these that is interesting. I use a ladder in training to show when you get up the corporate ladder, you get a different viewpoint.
Yeah.
But I did find myself sometimes, because I had a really nice office and people are working really hard and they don't know what you do. Right. So I did feel that urge to say, like, you realize I've been on a 2-hour call just to get the budget, just to get our budget for next quarter. Like, you do things and you get misperceived. But I remember Dr. Samples, the chief that I referenced earlier, he literally told me, he said, one of the most difficult things about being in charge is you can't defend yourself. Like if you meet with someone confidentially, you can't go down the hallway and, they may spread rumors about you. You can't, you don't have an avenue to defend yourself. And it's the same way about what you're doing. My job was so different from theirs that, and by the way, this is what else I found out. Even if I did say I've been on a 3-hour call to get a budget, they don't care. These are government employees. They always have the budget met. They don't care how it got there. They're just expecting the good result. So I had to learn early on, you ain't going to be no superhero to your employees. Really,
Right.
you just got to stay steady and consistent, and hope you earn their respect.
Yeah. So, something I did, and this is different. I wasn't as high up as you were, Ron, but something that really helped me and helped my associates understand what I was working on. I liked to be able to hear what was happening within my team. And so I had, instead of sitting in the office that I had created almost like a little space that was like back where everyone else was, so I could hear and see everything. And therefore they were able to communicate with me, and they also saw what I was working on. But that's not always going to be an option. So it does make it difficult when you are, because the higher up you go, the more your day is filled with phone calls, conference calls, meetings. And it's easy for those that are the worker bees to say, what are you doing all day? So
I had a lot of
it's
things
tough.
because I told you I worked with these guys when I first got promoted. It was like
Yeah.
money bags. Like there was a lot of things. They say they you got a pretty good raise. They look at your office. It all sends a message. So you just gotta let the storm settle on that.
Right.
Just be consistent. Do your job.
Right. Yeah. And if they know your heart, like if these people, they know you well enough to know that you're a hard worker, right? It's the ones that don't know you that well that might draw their own conclusions. But I think it's this great advice. And, I hope everyone's enjoyed this episode, and we hope that you never have to deal with these incompetent and strange personality types, but you probably have or are currently. And so we want you to be able to be ready and be equipped to thrive in no matter what condition you're currently in.
Yeah, very true. So folks, I've actually had several questions come to me, and I've just referred them to a particular episode. I had someone talking about weak words. I said, you need to go back and listen to the one, Talk Like a Boss.
Yeah.
But what I'm realizing is there's just so many people that don't even know this podcast is out there. One of the biggest favors you can do is tell someone about it. But when I say that, this is what I've been doing, Chris, and I think you've done it as well. I had a friend of mine wanted to listen to an episode. I said, pull your phone out now. I'm going to find it for you. And I clicked follow. So the point is we all have good intentions.
Right.
But Kristin and I, literally, if we just had half of our Facebook group, if they actually followed the podcast and listened, it would put us, we're so close to being in really an influential place that it wouldn't take that many people. Now, we believe in it. We're not telling you to mark it and never listen to an episode. We want you to listen. And if you like it, follow it. This person already listened with me in the vehicle, so I knew they liked it. But sometimes you got to take that extra step. People mean well. To get Amazon reviews on my book, Kristin, I have had, I don't even know how many people go, oh my God, I loved your book. I went into a restaurant 2 days ago. The guy goes, I finished your book.
Nice.
And I was like, well, thanks, man. I said,
That's
hey,
cool.
would you mind to do an Amazon review? I'm being honest with you.
Yeah.
I'd say there's an 80% chance. And he was like, absolutely. Yeah. There's an 80% chance he won't.
Oh,
so
yeah.
It's human nature.
The minute they walk out the door.
I've had so many people tell me like, yeah, I'm going to write a review. So guys, we're just asking you if you'll take that additional step and really help people. A lot of people don't even know how to get podcasts. Download Spotify for them. Put the app on there. If they got an Apple phone, pull it up and show them where the podcast is.
Yes. I'm glad you're saying that. Yeah, there are a lot of people. I have people asking me, I have Apple. How do I go and rate you? And it actually is a little cumbersome on it. Isn't it crazy? I'm like, wait, where is it? Just scroll to the bottom. So, but yeah, thank you for putting the effort forth. We appreciate it.
We sure do. All right, everybody, be the leader you're meant to be.
We'll see you next week.
The Dirty Side of Leadership podcast is brought to you by Forward Operations. If you'd like to book Ron or Kristin for speaking events, training, or executive coaching, visit forwardoperations.com. Be the leader you're meant to be.